This video will cover modifications as well as accommodations that can be used in inclusion for general education assessment. So let's get started. What is a modification? A modification is a change in what is being taught or expected from the student. So making an assignment easier, making it shorter. So maybe you're giving out a test and it's multiple choice. You want to make a modification, you might make the test shorter, and instead of giving 4 multiple choice options, you might give that student 3 choices or 2 choices. So that would be a modification. An accommodation is a change that helps a student overcome or work around the disability. So allowing a student who has trouble writing to give their answers orally is an example of an accommodation. So modification, you're changing the curriculum, you're changing the test, whatever it might be. Accommodation, you are giving the student a change that helps them work around their disabilities. Another accommodation, we do accommodations all the time in a wide variety of things. So accommodation on the state test might be students with trouble, they have trouble reading. When they take the math assessment, they have the questions read to them. So that would be an accommodation. The test itself isn't being modified, but they have an accommodation in place to help them. So let's talk about the different types of supports that we have here. So we went through the terminology, what a modification is, what accommodation is. So in special education, and I know a lot of people in the class teach special education, so we know specially designed instruction means adapting as appropriate the needs of an eligible child in the content, the delivery of instruction, and the methodology. So you are adapting, you're changing the content, the curriculum, whatever it might be, to make it better for that student. So you need to adapt instruction. So you might modify what is being taught and how it's being taught and how that child works at school. All right, so there's an example in this article here, but I can give you several examples from my life. So many students, they might have trouble sitting with other students, or they might have trouble paying attention. Students that have ADD and ADHD, so an accommodation they have is preferential seating. So they get a seat in the front of the classroom next to somebody that they work well with. So that's an accommodation. Another what might be that tests are read orally, or modified tests and assignments, so that the test is changed, the assignments changed to better be adapted for the students. So some other areas that which modifications or accommodations can often be made are with scheduling. So students can have extra time to complete assignments. If it's a longer test, it can be broken up over several days. The setting, so students can work in a small group or one-on-one with the teacher. I teach special ed, so I pull small groups of students to work with them on reading and math, and providing that specially designed instruction with those with modifications and accommodations. Materials, so it could be audio taped books or lectures, giving copies of the teacher's lecture notes, using large print books, braille, or books on CD. So those are different material accommodations. Instruction, so reducing the difficulty of assignments, which a lot of my students have that accommodation in their IEPs. Reducing the reading level, that's something else, another accommodation, providing students work on their instructional level, and using a student or peer tutor. Student response, so students might be allowed to answer orally, using a word processor for written work, or using sign language, a communication device, braille, or using their native language if they have trouble with English. Then we have supplementary aids and services. So using adaptive equipment, assistive technology, peer tutors, and one-on-one aid. All those things are supplementary aids and services. And then there's also related services. So a lot of my students have speech, work with a speech pathologist. So they work with different medical professionals, things like that. Occupational therapists, so they have difficulty with their handwriting, things in those fine motor skills. So here are some of the related services in the law: speech language pathology and audiology services, interpreting services, psychological services, physical and occupational therapy, recreation, early identification and assessment of disabilities in children, counseling services, including rehabilitation counseling, orientation and mobility services, medical services for diagnostic or evaluation purposes, school health services, and school nurse services. I have there's a student coming to our school next year who has a full-time nurse that accompanies him. He has a trach to help him breathe and in a wheelchair, and he has a full-time nurse to help him out. So that's part of the related services, social work services. So these are some of the services, but there's also other related services as well.